In this ACT video, we're going to take a look at fractions. All right, well, first of all, let's just talk about what a fraction is. It's just a piece of a whole. And let's look at the parts of a fraction. And here we've got 3/5. And just to review with you, remember the number in the top is called the numerator. And the number in the bottom is called the denominator. And in this video, we're going to talk about equivalent fractions and how to compare fractions as well as fractions in simplest form. We'll take a look at adding and subtracting fractions in a different video as well as multiplying and dividing fractions. So first thing, let's talk about what equivalent fractions are. The word equivalent just means equal. Okay? So equivalent fractions are different fractions that actually name the same number. So for example, 1/2. Okay, you guys can visualize what half of something is. Well, 1/2 and 2/4 and 4/8 are all examples of equivalent fractions. We can take 2/4 and say we have a pie and we cut it in fourths, 4 pieces, and we color in 2 out of those 4 pieces, okay, then that's the same thing as coloring in half the circle. Same thing goes for 4/8. So they're naming the same thing, so that makes them equivalent. They have the same value. Not equivalent would be something like 2/5 is definitely not equal to 3/4. Okay? And one easy way to compare two fractions to see if they're equivalent is to cross multiply. So if we just take a look over here at 1/2 and 2/4, which we know to be equivalent, but if we cross multiply, 4 times 1 is 4, and 2 times 2 is 4. And so because the cross products are equal, we know the fractions are equal. So back over here, looking at the 2/5 and comparing that to the 3/4, when we cross multiply, 4 times 2 is 8, and 5 times 3 is 15. Those cross products aren't equal, so those fractions are not equivalent. Okay, so easy way to check for equivalent fractions is just to cross multiply. Fractions that are in simplest form. We always want to write our fractions in simplest form. And a fraction is in simplest form when the numerator and the denominator have no common factors greater than 1. So let's go back just to good old 2/4. 2/4 is not in simplest form because the numerator and the denominator both have 2 in common. So in other words, 2 goes into 2 and 2 goes into 4. So we're going to actually divide these both by 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So 2/4 is going to be written as 1/2 if we want to write it in simplest form. Let's look at another example. Let's take 5/15. All right, well, when I look at 5 and 15, I know 5 goes into both of those numbers. So if I divide the numerator by 5 and I divide the denominator by 5, I get 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 15 divided by 5 is 3. So we would write that as 1/3. And one more, let's just say we have 2/7. 2/7, when I look at that number and I think about the factors, they don't have any factors in common besides the number 1. So then I know 2/7 is already in simplest form. Now, when we're comparing fractions, we're going to do this the same way we did to check for equivalency. You can cross multiply to compare fractions, and the greater cross product appears next to the greater fraction. So let's take a look at some examples. we're going to fill in the blank with a less than, a greater than, or an equal to. So our first example, we have 3/5, and we're comparing that to 2/3. Okay, so right up here, 3/5 compared to 2/3. Easy way to determine if these are equivalent or if one's less than or greater than the other, simply cross multiply. 3 times 3 is 9, so write that above that. And 5 times 2 is 10, so write the 10 above that. Well, 9 is less than 10, so we would say that 3/5 is less than 2/3. All right, so let's take a look at this second example. Now we're comparing 3/11 to 2/9. Okay, well, we're going to cross multiply, and 9 times 3 is 27, and 11 times 2 is 22, and 27 is greater than 22, which means 3/11 is greater than 2/9. So we'd use a greater than sign to compare those two. And then at the very bottom here, we can actually compare these three fractions. Let's see if we can move that up. All right, so we're going to just start by comparing the first two. We're going to cross multiply 7 times 2, and that gives me 14, and 3 times 6 gives me 18. So let me erase all those lines in the middle now that you kind of know what's going on. So since 14 is less than 18, we say 2/3 is less than 6/7. Then we're going to take the 6/7 and compare it to the 7/8 by doing the same thing. So 8 times 6 is 48. We're not looking at the 18 anymore. And 7 times 7 is 49. 48 is less than 49. So 6/7 is less than 7/8. So we kind of have a lot going on here. So I'm going to write this as 2/3 is less than 6/7, which is less than 7/8. So we always want to write our fractions in simplest form. And when we're comparing fractions, we simply want to cross multiply and make a comparison of the cross products.